Politics of Modern Faith, a war against the structure of religion. My name is Irfan Sonawala. This is the third video in the series of In the Act of Being a Muslim. What is the difference between faith and religion? Both are used sometimes interchangeably and sometimes with separate meanings. This separation of meanings is not merely linguistic. Those are charged politically, in which one is not merely preferred over the other, rather, one is completely debunked and the other casted as more essential or natural to humans. And this is achieved by associating the faith as being subject-centered and associated to individuals, and religion to masses, and tying it back historically to a unified religious format. And all contemporary thinkers, atheists and believers alike, accept this method. Through this method, atheists debunk religion by showing historical issues. For example, how once certain thing was right hundreds of years ago is considered ethically wrong now. And they present faith as natural and genuine as long as it ties to an individual now and thus relevant, making it needed by a subject or individual. Through this method, historical rituals that binds masses are casted to religion, like namaz, and the practice of silence, we call it bandagi or maraqaba or yoga, meditation, or I consider as more personalized exercises and not mass practices. Something that you are not obligatory to do is not like you have to do it as historically mandatory. Rather, it is good for you as psycho-personal exercises, and thus that is what casted as spiritual, just like regular physical exercises. As long as it is not you have to do, it becomes spiritual, and you have to is casted as part of the masses, as part of the religion. For example, Sam Harris, a famous atheist philosopher, on one hand denies the need and fallacy of religion, but on the other, he also accepts and presents the need for spirituality. And by spirituality, he means some sort of personal exercises adopted only after those exercises that is traditionally associated to religion are now stripped off of words, stories, concepts, and meanings from those religious exercises, and then personalizing it beyond any recognizable historical format. Now it becomes spiritual. We need to realize the political castration of religion. Not a favor to we need to understand that how the political castration of religion works to a favored personalized exercises of modernity. Whatever you call it, post-modernity or post-postmodernity, it's however defined historically. Now we need to analyze how they castrate religion, or the part of religion that is castrated. And here comes the primary question regarding religion. Is religion a combination of stories, concepts, sets of meanings, either circling around historical figures or mythical figures? Thus, it is religious because it is about those figures or historical figures. That's why it is religious. For example, all the stories of Prophet Muhammad are religious because those are about Prophet Muhammad. Or is it believing in those stories to be factual, that's without historical evidences, or even against the fact that those stories are not rationally possible? That makes it religious? So, does the rational impossibility of those stories make it religious? So, it is religious because of the nature of its stories. For example, the story of Miraj, which is visiting Allah on a winged horse to heavens, is rationally impossible. And is it because of rational impossibility that we're calling it religious? Or third, is it the societal positioning, that is, common acceptability of it being factual by more than one person, that makes it religious? Thus, it is religious because of the involvement of masses in the sharing of beliefs. So the story of Miraj is religious because it is believed by majority of Muslims as factual. And is that making it religious? Or it may not be commonly acceptable by all in a society as factual. Rather, diversity in the acceptability of those stories, from factual to symbolic. But as long as those stories can be celebrated together in a society, in arts, rites, rituals, and ceremonies, then those can attain a religious rubric then, I guess. So is it because of that? Thus, Miraj is not believed as a factual by all Muslims. A lot of Muslims believe it to be symbolic. But as long as most of them celebrate together, or all of them celebrate together in a society, in a ritual, ceremony, or in art, that's why it is religious. Or when the society realizes, this is the fourth one, or when the society realizes the historical and rational absurdity of those stories, then probably they create means to substitute or compensate for those absurdity and falsehood by positioning it as symbolically true. Making those symbolical gives life to those stories by replacing stories with theories, theologies, or moral values that one can validate rationally in society or nature, even in our discourses. But there is no real rationale to tie those stories with those theories or theologies. These are the primary questions of modern Muslim minds and atheists alike, to religions and their beliefs, not just Islam or Muslims, to religions and their beliefs, all religions. And all the above points are certainly legitimate questions and criticism that no believer can rationally deny, and most of the religions would avoid answering those as well. However, in the act of being a Muslim, as in the series that what we are doing, we do not need to be so afraid to attempt to addressing these questions, as our beliefs are dynamic. As we are not believing right now, we are in the act of being a Muslim. So we are in that act of questioning. We are dynamic and open-ended. Change and intellectual growth is the cornerstone of our approach. There is a genealogical fallacy, and that's what I want to mention here. Until now, I identified all those questions that I've identified against religion. And I'm saying there's a genealogical fallacy in the primary assumption for the understanding of the concept of religion in the above questions. Even those were criticisms as well. So in this questions and criticism, I'm saying there is a primal fallacy. This is the same assumption that is mostly adopted by theologians, religious pundits, and atheists alike. The assumption is that when a child without a belief is born in a family of believers, that is, who already have a certain prior religion. So the family already have a certain prior religion. A child is just born. Does religion exist prior to the child? So the family is already believing in it. They already had a religion. Child is just born into it. So religion exists prior to the child or prior to the believer. And that religion is independent of the individual's belief. What is the fallacy in it? Before I mention this fallacy, let's compare the approaches by theologians, atheists, historians, and anthropologists. Theologians, if we look at it, or religious pundits, and even atheists, start the narration of religion with the prime theological figure, like Prophet Muhammad, who are center of the stories and theories together. Like stories and theories both are tied up and centered around that primal figure. Either there is those to be gods, prophets, and other theological figures or mystical figures, in which believers are mostly participatory agents and mere carriers of those beliefs and stories and pass it along to the next progeny. For atheists, believers are not mere carriers of those stories. Rather, they are brainwashed agents. But it all begins with either gods or theological figures like prophets. A historian, on the other hand, does not begin from the theological figures. Rather, from the historical evidence, books, or archaeological evidence. Their job is to disassociate the beliefs from the historical facts, symbolic characters, and associated theories and meanings. A historian serves the history and its reconstruction beyond historians' own beliefs and biases. This approach is certainly essential to study the beginning or changes in beliefs, practices, ceremonies of Muslims in different cultures in various times. But is this the approach to study the role of religion in one's life in the present time, like directly to me or to you? I don't think so. It's a good approach for going against throughout the cultures, throughout the times, but not for us, directly relating to me as an individual. Anthropologists have an entirely different interest. They're interested in looking at the society as a whole and their common beliefs and practices without branding it as true or false. As long as the society as a whole believes in it, their beliefs are considered real, regardless of if their beliefs are true or not. In the study of that society, anthropologists are time bound to that time of study, which of course can be in the present time. This is a good approach to study a society and try to understand the role of religion in it, especially in comparison to other societies. This approach can identify the commonality among how people describe their beliefs and its use, its social practice, its celebrations, etc. This also helps reveal the internal or hidden meanings of their practices by various members of the society as a group, how they believe it. That's fine, or the meaning they associate with it. However, this approach does not identify the need behind a subject's practices or belief, the internal need of the human. Now I go to the psychoanalytical approach. Through this approach, I claim fallacy is all these previous questions and understanding of religion is through this psychoanalytical approach. In this approach, the central part of the study is a believer himself as a subject. Psychoanalyst's narration begins from the time a person is born, or rather from the time his consciousness or unconscious begin forming or retaining images, understanding, feelings, etc. This is prior to the time the subject is a believer. He's just born. He doesn't have a belief. He's just born. And this is why genealogically, this is the right and fruitful approach to understand a believer vis-a-vis the beliefs. This reveals the structure of the human psyche before the societal structure of religion and beliefs take hold of him. So genealogically, it is the subject, his conscious and unconscious, that predates the beliefs and stories he holds later. The human need for religion and how the stories and beliefs of religion satisfies human needs can be understood through this psychoanalytical approach. A subject may change his stories or beliefs later in life, but if religion has to be studied as understood, believed, or practiced by a believer, then it has to be studied through this psychoanalytical approach, as well as, of course, anthropologically and historically. But this approach can identify how beliefs interacts and find its place in a believer's psyche. So, do you know what's the difference in these two approaches? In the first case, when we are centering around the stories that exist prior to believers, that family had the belief and child is born, he didn't have a belief. So the stories or the religion exists prior to the believers. Then the role of humans is merely assumed to be manipulated and used as an agent of hallucination, that we are just seeping into it and we are using them. Like in the statement of religion is the opium of masses. We are just being used as a medium. So in this approach, religion exists independent of its believers, like stories, who are independent of its listeners. But when we are looking at the psychoanalytical and genealogically, then it is the human conscious and unconscious that predates the belief and stories in the history of a believer. So a child is born with the conscious and unconscious. He had no belief. So the conscious and the unconscious and how he grows predates even the belief. The belief comes later. The stories come later. So in this second approach, religion is not just accepted, but created in a subject, as there is an inner need or structure of human mind that requires it. The other reason we call the theologians an atheist approach has genealogical fallacy is that the stories or theories, that is the content of beliefs, that's what I'm calling it, stories or theories, the content of beliefs outside of the subject can only be verified either historically or scientifically. So the only two ways for us to verify the event of a mirage, for example, of Prophet Muhammad is historical and scientific. And because of the incremental development of scientific research, which of course happens in many, as research goes, in many decades, and lack of the historical evidences, which goes lesser and lesser as the time goes, our understanding in different times changes. And the content of the beliefs would certainly be proven false in one time of the history or the other. But this verification of religion will be certainly not analyzed why a subject retained and or practiced his religion to begin with. So a subject has, and I'm giving a very important, a subject has believed or practiced a religion and its stories for his own psychological and inner needs, and not because it is historically or scientifically true. He may have to believe it to be true, to internalize or accept it, but it is not necessarily historical or scientific truth that makes it acceptable truth for him. And it cannot be the acceptable truth that creates his internal need for which it was practiced or adopted. I'm gonna say it again. So a subject has believed or practiced a religion and its stories for his own psychological needs, and not because it is historically or scientifically true. He may have to believe it to be true to internalize it or accept it, but it is not necessarily the historical truth or his scientific truth that makes it acceptable for him. And it cannot be the acceptable truth that creates his internal need for which it was practiced or adopted. Summarizing it all, faith, religion, and spirituality as terms are politicized in a certain fashion in the current times. What is religion? The question that needs to be tied to multidisciplinary approaches, especially historical, anthropological, psychoanalytical, that we all talked about just right now. The approach adopted by religious pundits and atheists alike have serious problems that must be realized.